Oh my gosh, we are live and so excited to be joined today by the amazing Ed Chafin, who is the founder of the Uncommon Leadership Institute. Ed and I had a chance to meet last month. It seems like longer. I
Yeah,
don't
it
know. It
does.
goes by so fast. But just last month, we met at this amazing 2-day public speaking training at the Heroic Public Speaking headquarters in New Jersey. And Ed was my seatmate, and we just hit it off right
Yep.
from the get go and had such a wonderful, lovely time. And he was gracious enough to come on the show and share so much of his wisdom. So I'm so happy you're here today, Ed. Welcome to the show. How have you been?
Thank you, Nicole. I've been excellent, been busy, enjoying life and all kinds of other things.
Good,
But
good.
yeah, it was an amazing experience that we had for those 2 days. It really was.
Yeah, it was quite special, quite
Yeah.
remarkable. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm looking forward to more. Well, tell me, we're talking about leadership today, which is a topic very near and dear to my heart. And, I think, I just came off of a marketing conference last week where we were talking about how AI is going to disrupt the
Hmm.
way everything works and very rapidly, and that the pace of
Yes,
change is happening more rapidly than it ever has in history.
exactly.
And it's such a critical topic because leadership and strong leadership is really going to be what it's going to take for us to really survive and thrive with all this change.
Yes.
So, my first question for you is, what do you think everybody is a leader? Like, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think leadership is something that's, assigned to someone, or when you get a role at work, or are we all leaders?
Great question. Um, we are all leaders. And it's interesting that we would start with that first question, Nicole, because I will ask if I'm speaking in a group or doing a team program or whatnot. Oftentimes I will ask, how many people in the room are leaders? And it's interesting the number of hands that don't go up. And then I'll ask that
Mm,
question again, and they somewhat get it. And then
yeah.
I'll talk about the fact that leadership for me, there's two pieces. It's personal and it's personalized. And the personal part is your self leadership. It starts, and the big question is, do you really know who you are as a person and a leader? And do you know how you affect others with your leadership style? But to the question you asked me, I've got this beautiful story. We winter in Fort Myers, and over the past few months, a young lady was cutting my hair. And as I got to know her, and she got to know me, she was asking me, more about my work that I do as a leadership consultant, executive coach. And she popped up unprovoked and said, "I'm not a leader." And I went, "Oh." I said, "Maddie, what makes you say that?" Well, I don't lead anyone. I said, "Okay, well, that's one version of leadership." I said, "But let me ask you this." I said, "How much weight have you lost the last 2 years?" She says,
Mm,
150 pounds. Yeah.
wow.
And I knew, obviously, I knew the answer to that. And I said, "Now think about it.
Yeah.
Maddie, you had to, number one, make an incredible commitment. You had to say, wait a minute, what I'm doing is not working. Let's
Mhm.
evaluate that, figure out what changes I need and want to make. You had to
Yeah.
create some desire in there. And then over that 2 year period, I'm sure you fell off the wagon a few times, right? Right. So you had to self regulate, you had to self manage, you had to self discipline to make this journey as productive as you made it. That's where leadership starts. It starts with
Mhm.
me, it starts with you. It's personal leadership. And I'll come back to the big question, as I call it. Do you really know who you are? And again, that ties to something else. Is my philosophy on leadership is who you are is how you lead. And who you are is the sum total of everything that's ever happened to you since the day you were born and maybe even before. So,
I I love that maybe even before part.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
that's such a powerful example. So, I have a follow-up question about that.
sure.
How if people aren't sure they know who they are or what they stand for, right?
Yeah.
I think many of us struggle with, like, that. how do you recommend people go about finding out who they are? Because I think that's such a valid point. Like your hairdresser who lost 150 pounds, incredible.
Yeah,
She had to have some deep intrinsic motivation to be self-disciplined to maybe
exactly.
do that.
Right.
So how does one go about finding out who they are and finding that self-motivation?
Well, I think it's a lifelong journey.
Mm,
The starting point, as I alluded to in Maddie's story, is something triggered her that said,
mm,
wait a minute, what I'm doing is not working. Or maybe it's not even that dramatic, Nicole. Maybe it's simply what I'm doing is okay, but maybe what does it look like to be more effective as a person
yes.
and a leader? So I think the starting point is just recognizing what I'm doing on a day in, day out basis. Is it working? If it's working, whatever is working, you want to keep and accentuate, right?
Yeah.
And then figure out what do we want to add. A lot of the executive coaching work that I do is people that have pretty solid base and fundamentals of leadership, but they're looking for that elevation, that proverbial next level. I think the other piece of discovering who you are is finding out how you affect other people. How do you
Mm.
do that? Well, as long as you're not the CEO, because the higher you go up, I was just reading this the other day because I'm coaching someone right now who aspires to become a CEO.
Yeah.
So I was reading this the other day. Once you become a CEO, you're in an echo chamber. You're not going to get a lot of accurate feedback, and you've lost your peers, right? So if I'm at that vice chair or executive VP level or VP level, I've got peers, I've got direct reports, and I think you can, for the most part, depending on the psychological safety you've created as a leader, can inquire simply, Nicole, you work for me. How is what I'm doing as your leader working for you? Tell me what's working.
Such a great question.
Right. And then,
How what I'm doing as a leader working for you?
right. And then the obvious question after that, after you've gotten some, is what else? Because you
Mhm.
want to, dive a little bit deeper. We know from brain science that first answer is usually sometimes a little bit superficial or not well thought. It's not deep. So you
Yeah.
want to ask, well, what else is working? Anything else you can think of? And then obviously you flip the coin. What would be more effective for you? What is it you wish that I would do? What would inspire you differently? So you hopefully you haven't created an environment where people are just going to tell you what you want to hear. Oh, Ed, you're the greatest leader I've ever worked with. There's nothing you could do. Hopefully you
I
haven't.
feel like that's a red flag, right?
It's a total red flag.
If I
It's
have
a
team members that aren't safe to really tell me what's on their mind,
yeah,
then I know that something's wrong,
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And hopefully you have the self-awareness and the humility that if that's the answer you get, you'll call BS on it. Instead of going, really? I'm that great?
Yeah, but I will say, like, it's very like you mentioned psychological safety,
Right.
which is so critical. So I think, how do you recommend cultivating that? Because
Oh,
there is a power imbalance between a
yep.
direct report and a leader that makes it naturally what makes it difficult for that direct report to share.
Yeah.
And so I feel like you have to create psychological safety, like even you have to go even more overboard in order for that to break through that barrier, right? How do you recommend leaders go about cultivating that more?
Well, that is the other piece of my philosophy about leadership. Leadership is personalized.
Okay.
So
Tell
let's
me.
think about it for a second. Let's say I've got 10 direct reports.
Yeah.
And this was an epiphany that I write about in my book that I had as a leader. When I hired an executive coach like myself, she came,
Mhm.
I'd been in the role as president of my company's division for 6 months. We were doing amazing things. We had created this unbelievable vision and mission and the culture.
Mhm.
And we were killing it in a lot of great ways. But what I found out from my executive coach was about half of my team is I'll never forget what Kathy said. She said, Ed, you haven't bothered to look over your shoulder. There's
Wow.
about half of your team laying in the ditch that can't keep up with you.
Wow.
And again, I was in pace setting mode, which was what was needed at the time. because
Yeah.
there was a huge transformation that had to happen with that division. At the time I took over, that division was the sum total of 4 acquisitions. Right after I took over, we did a 5th and then a 6th and a 7th. And we had these companies we had to integrate into one culture. And when I took over, it just wasn't working. We had the 4 acquisitions. So the pace setting leadership style was the right one to really, make that change effort we needed to make. But then I needed to slow down. So what I had to do was recognize that about half of my team could keep up with me and love keeping up with me. And the other half, I needed to understand what motivated them and how could I get the most out of them. So it's that personalized, and then recognizing, to the question that you specifically asked, the psychological safety. My version of it may be completely different than yours.
Oh,
For,
that's
for,
so
for
true.
example, autonomy is one of my number one values when it comes to psychological safety, where yours might be
Same. Mine is the
fair.
same.
Yours is the same. Very good.
Mhm.
But somebody else's might be fairness or empathy or
Mhm.
safety. So it's again creating, and if we look at the work that Brene Brown has done over the last few years, I believe it's about a leader being willing to be transparent and vulnerable,
Yeah.
such that you create that environment where people are comfortable calling you out and or having honest dialogue with you about what's working, what's not working. But again, I want to go back and emphasize psychological safety. And, there's a lot of talk about that in the market and has been for the last several years. But the thing I think people are missing is the personalized piece of that. My
Yeah.
definition of psychological safety may be very different than yours. So if I try, and again, the back of my book, one size fits all leadership is dead. So that's that's what we're talking about. I want to understand what motivates you intrinsically to see the best out of you. And that may be very different for each person that I'm blessed to lead.
I've never thought about psychological safety as being unique to each individual
Yep.
person. Like, you're totally challenging me to ask my team members one-on-one on what their
Mm,
definition is of psychological safety. I think that's a great exercise for any leader in their one-on-ones to really try to understand that, because I mean, I'm just thinking about people on my own team and how, for example, I have one team member who is autonomy is, I mean, I would guess that would be hers. She just wants to go get it done on her own
yeah. Just give
time.
her the high level and leave her
Exactly.
alone. Right.
Right. But then other people, they want to collaborate, right? Like, they want to be connected. And
Well, or they really need to know how you judge success and what your
yes,
full expectations are. Okay,
yes,
that's the thing some leaders miss, is that not again, some people, it's not micromanaging. It's what are your expectations as a leader? How do I know that I'm doing what you want me to do and that I'm being successful at it? So there's some people that don't need that, and other people that really need you to be definitive about how you're going to measure their success.
that's so relevant to me, because I actually literally just had a conversation with a team member about setting expectations.
Is that
And
right?
yes,
Was there an
literally.
event that caused that?
Oh, yes, yes. And so, as I'm talking to you about that, like, as leaders, we're not perfect. We're
No.
infallible.
Yep.
We are
Yep.
all going to make mistakes. And, truthfully, leadership, when you own a company or you're leading a team, a lot of times it feels like it's a big mantle.
Yeah.
I think I personally take it very seriously,
Yeah.
because I recognize, but because it's a big mantle, sometimes we can be hard on ourselves when
Hmm.
we make those mistakes.
Yeah.
What is your advice for leaders on how they can bounce back for, when you make a mistake, to just kind of like move forward in the best way possible and make the changes that need to happen to help elevate the team?
Interesting question. Let me think about that for a moment.
Yeah.
Something bubbled up for me. I've had a couple of clients lately that have been struggling with perfectionism. And so
Yeah.
what bubbled up for me when you were asking that question is, well, it depends on what's their motivation, what's one of their driving
Mm,
values, or yeah, what's driving them. And if perfectionism is driving them, whew, that's a tough one to overcome. So because
Ah,
it really starts with forgiving yourself and recognizing we're all human and no one's perfect. But so let's move that aside and say, okay, I'm just a normal person. Not that a perfectionist is normal. I didn't mean to say that, but it, but,
we're
but
all abnormal, right? Like,
yeah. But if someone has made a mistake with a leader, and what I'm assuming, what I think I heard in the question is made a mistake that affected someone on your team. Is that what I'm
yes.
hearing? Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to that honest dialogue.
Yeah.
With that, asking the questions and being willing, I think, to come with the mea culpa to say, let me apologize, and beginning that way. In fact, I'm looking at our time. I'm a storyteller. Let me tell you a quick story.
Please.
So mentioned that, when I took over that division, it was the sum total at that time of 4 acquisitions. Well, one of my VPs on the team was just this phenomenal rock star. And so about a year into my leadership there of that division, I was doing her annual review. And I made the comment to her, and I'll make up a name. I said, Ann, you and I used to collaborate a lot on client situations. You used to bring me a lot of our client opportunities and problems, and you and I brainstorm and figure out what to do to save the client or solve the client's problems. You don't do that so much anymore. What caused that? Because you don't care.
Mm.
Yeah. I managed to take a deep breath and I managed to continue to talk. And I'm thinking, so I'm dual, here, trying to think, what in the world have I done as a
Right.
leader to send the message, I don't care? And all of a sudden, a light bulb hit me. And I went, time out. And I said, you said a few minutes ago that the reason you don't bring me these opportunities anymore because I don't care. I said, I got to tell you what, that kind of upset me a lot because I don't think you've ever worked for anyone, because I know who you've worked for the last 20 years, that
Mhm.
cares more about customers and their satisfaction than I do. So I had to do a quick reflection in the mirror. What have I done? And I said, I think I got it figured out. I said, you've been in this business a long time. You know a lot of these clients inside and out. You come to me with their problem. You used to come to me with their problems, and you would go on and on and on and on and on. And I said, I would cut you off, wouldn't I? She goes, oh yeah, you did it all the time. You do it all the time. I said, okay. So here's the divide that we've got to cross. I said, you have got all this history and you want to give me context and you want to tell me the whole story. I said, what you've got to understand is that I make very quick decisions. I'm
Mm.
moving at warp speed. And I said, so you're 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes into this conversation. I've already figured out what I think we ought to do. I'm cutting you off. She goes, yeah. I said, so here's the deal. I'll make a promise to you. I'll start moving more in your direction. I'll allow you some more runway to give me more context and more information. But I said, Aunt, you got to land the plane. You got to land the plane a little. So you got to meet me somewhere in the middle. And so that's going to be our dialogue buzzwords. If I look at you and say, Ann, can you land the plane? That's your rubber band to know. Oh, I'm Ed's got his formulated his ideas. Let's talk about that now. And then and I said, can we agree? And I said, you've got my commitment. I'm going to give you more runway. I'm not going to cut you off. But can I get your commitment? If I say, can you land the plane? You're going to go, oh, yeah, let me finish up here. And she goes, yes, we can do that. I said, but here's one thing I'm not going to compromise on. You leave me 5-minute voicemails. I don't listen to them. I star 6 them every time. And I said, so just, say, Ed, it's urgent. I need to talk to you about X, Y, or Z. Know that as soon as I'm available, I will call you back. But please stop leaving me long voicemails. The funny thing is, she and I haven't worked together since 2008. She's still a friend. We communicate from time to time. She still leaves me long voicemails.
That is a beautiful example. What I love about that is, first of all, you had created that psychological safety that she could come to you and say, "You
Yep.
don't care."
You don't care. Boy,
Sh
you
and
talk about a
that's
you talk about a gut punch though. Woo.
yes, but you know what was great about that is you found this way to humbly accept her feedback by also acknowledging not like that you did care and
Yeah.
and showing respect for yourself to say like, here's how this is, I think it was just very, very respectful and gracious to her and to you the way that you managed that situation, right? Like you didn't fall on the sword
No,
and
I didn't fall on the sword, but I also, I'm proud of the fact that I didn't react because I wanted to. Trust me, I wanted to go, me? Don't care. I really wanted to get self-righteous right in the moment.
uh,
But something caused me to take a deep breath. And I will tell you, the main thing is that I valued her so much. She was one of the most incredible
mm,
people I've ever worked with in my entire career. In fact, I used to joke that if I was going to war, she'd be the first person that I would draft.
oh,
And so I valued her so much for the work and the effort that she put into it, as well as recognizing the massive conversion that she had to make when we bought her company, to adjust to our culture and to where we were going. So so that was part of it is I was recognized, well, wait a minute, one of the most valued people on my team, I've upset in a way that I never intended to do. So that goes back to, do you really know how you affect other people with your leadership style, your natural leadership style? Do you really understand that? Because again, I'll keep using the same number. If I have 10 direct reports, my natural way of leading may work for half of them without any effort. I don't have to change a thing. The other half, I may need to really get individual. And
so true.
that
Oh,
sounds like a lot of work, doesn't it?
it is, it does, but it's, but it's just, I feel like if you can really dial that in well,
Yeah.
then it's gonna be a multiplier because as a leader, you lead teams, and if you can figure out, then it's gonna multiply the impact that your team's gonna have if you're able to do that. Wow. That's
So I
such a
just realized too, I'm not sure I really answered the other question you asked me about how does a leader overcome
Mhm.
mistakes that they've made. So I've given a case study of how in the moment I was able to overcome that. But it really is about humbling yourself, I think,
Yeah.
and being willing to have that honest dialogue to say, what's going on? I think something's not working.
Yeah.
Help me understand what we can do to bridge that gap. It comes down to, I think, some level of humility and forgiving yourself and recognizing none of us are going to, as long as we are leading people and working in any kind of business environment, whether it be B2B or B2C or whatever it may be, we're not going to get it all right every day.
It's so true. I think too, I was just having a conversation with my brother last week. So, and sometimes when you have disagreements with people in your
Mhm.
family, right? And we were having a disagreement. And I remember, it got pretty heated. We were having this heated conversation, about this thing. He got upset about something, and the conversation shifted the minute I became very vulnerable.
Hmm.
I was like,
What did
there's
you actually do to be vulnerable? What that look like?
sheesh, I shared with him, like, something that it was like a personal like, I basically shared with him a personal weakness. I said, "You
Hmm.
know what? This is something that I struggle with."
Hmm.
And I that softened everything because,
Hmm.
I think I shared a story. I think I shared a story illustrating how this was something that was something that it was a moment of humility for me. And the minute I did that,
Yep.
whole conversation shifted and
Excellent.
he softened, and then we were able to kind of work through it. And I think that was like an example to me of like what you're just saying is like try to lead with humility. It's hard. It's really difficult, to do it. But
Yeah, our egos get in the way sometimes, right?
so a lot of the time, my gosh. And I think for leaders too, it's even harder because you're the one that there's this expectation that you've got to have it figured out and you've got to
Ooh,
say, right?
ooh,
And I
yeah,
don't know if that's societal or
yeah.
whatever the case may be, but what do you think about that, Ed? Like,
Well,
how can you release some of
yeah,
that?
yeah. You just tipped off something else that I coach to quite often is that you're always leading. You're never not leading.
Mhm.
So if you are a leader that has direct reports, maybe leading a team or a department or a division or maybe even an entire company, everything you do is being watched and it's being observed and it's being measured by that person's values and beliefs and perceptions as to whether it's working for them. Are you authentic or not? But so let's just make it up. The division I ran ended up with 1,200 employees. All 1,200 of those employees could form completely different opinions about who I was as a leader. And I've got no control over that. But the thing that a lot of leaders forget is that everything they do is being observed. It's the old saying about what you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying, right?
So true.
Right. So that's fundamental from a leadership standpoint, in recognizing that when you've been given that mantle, when you've been given that responsibility, you're on stage. You're on stage, whether you want to be or not.
You're on stage whether you want to be or not. That is such a true statement.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think what you said too is really interesting, is you can't control what people's perceptions of you are.
No.
Which I think makes it so much more critical as a leader, that you're making decisions that are in alignment with your value system,
Correct.
Your integrity, and also accepting that you can't please everyone or make
Right.
everyone happy.
Yeah.
Especially when you have 1,200 reports, right?
Yeah, and which leads me to another one of my saying is that there are times when the leader has the right to define reality.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Tell me more. I like that.
Well, so if you have the leadership philosophy that I have, which is when you sum it all up, it's really a servant leadership. If I'm given a mantle, then I believe that I've been put to serve them, not them serve me. So starting with a servant's heart in leadership, some people then believe, well, how am I going to keep everybody happy? Well, you're not. Number one, just what we talked about. But number two, to the point I made a minute ago, they're looking at you. They want to see a strong leader. They want to see a leader that can make decisions. They want to see a leader that can set the vision and marshal the troops to around that vision and that mission. So there are times when I'm coaching. In fact, it's the same executive I'm coaching that wants to be a CEO. And he has the potential in the next 3 to 5 years in his organization. That could be a reality. His profile, based on the assessment that I used, the Berkman Method assessment, showed me, and then we confirmed in the 360 I did, he's a democratic style of leader. He likes to get everybody's opinions before he makes these big decisions. And that works at some level, but not always. It can't be the only style he's using. So we're working on that. And he's been able to give me some examples when he decided, okay, this is what we're going to do, and told and he's got a huge group that he runs at this organization. But yeah, it's the leader saying, wait a minute, this is my decision, and then communicating the why.
Yeah. Wow, I think that's so interesting what you mentioned about being able to change your leadership style depending on what the decision is. Like, that requires a ton of discernment, like a massive amount of being able to discern, based in this situation, I need to do democratic style. Based on this situation, I need to take a more authoritative approach,
Yep.
How do you help? I'm sure a lot of that just comes from experience, right? Lived experience, failing and making mistakes. But as a coach, what do you do to coach your leaders on how they can get better at discerning what each situation requires? Because it is so nuanced, and I think that is just going to be such a more critical skill. Looking forward.
Ken, you may be familiar with Ken Blanchard, the person who wrote the 1 Minute Manager back in the 80s. His organization a few years ago did a study, and what they determined was 52% of us use one leadership style all the time. So we're at a deficit most of the time for most leaders. We can actually say most leaders are only using the one style. So how do I coach to that? Well, I have an HBR article that is one of the most widely read that's ever been published by HBR, by Dan Goleman and some of his team members, Dan Goleman, the father of social emotional intelligence, called Leadership That Gets Results, where they've actually codified, quantified, and studied 6 leadership styles of what works and what doesn't. Well, there's 2 styles, coercive and pace setting, that actually have a negative factor over time. They can be positive at certain moments, but they can't be the only style, and they're not sustainable. That's the right term to use. So I coach to that to help people understand and figure out when they, and the one that, as an executive coach, that a lot of leaders move to is the coaching style. So let's say and again, in fact, I don't know how many listeners we've got today, but if they want to email me, I will be happy to send that article to them, that HBR article, ed@edchafin.com. That's 2 F's. And gosh, I just lost my train of thought, but hate that when that happens.
About the articles.
Yeah, I did a left turn on the article, but the different leadership styles. Yeah, I forgot where I was going with that.
Sorry about it. It's all good. We can come back to it.
It'll come back.
Yeah, no, I think that's going to be so important. I mentioned this conference that I went to, and one of the interesting facts they talked about was, because of the proliferation of AI and how it's just going to change our lives, what's happening is they've already found that low performers who use AI in their jobs can improve their performance 43%.
Oh.
So there's like going to be this great leveling field where basically, everyone's going to be middle of the road and everyone else is going to have to be elevated above that, right? So what they're predicting is that at some point in the near future, the jobs that aren't being done by AI are going to be so far advanced that people are going to have to come out of college and go directly into middle management.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Can you imagine what that would be like? Can you imagine a 21-year-old fresh out of school having to jump into a management position?
Yeah.
What do you think about how people that are young kids, teenagers, college students, even young kids, what can we be doing? I'm a parent.
Yeah.
What are the things that we can be doing now as parents of these younger generation to help prepare them for those kinds of challenges?
Wow, that's a big question. You don't ask easy questions, Nicole.
That one's been on my mind because I think it is that is going to be the challenge of our next that we're going to be facing. It's not going to be technical skills and knowing, how to code or all that. It's going to be, how can we get better at all of this that you're talking about,
Well, maybe it goes, I don't know that I have the answer. I think there's multiple answers here, but the first one that comes to my mind is modeling at home. Okay. The second one is having those conversations early on with kids in your home to say, this is what leaders, one of the other things that stands out for me, especially in the work that I do a lot of teamwork, is very few people, one of the exercises I do is I have them stand up, pair up, and talk about a leader they admire and why they admire that leader. But when I ask the direct question, have you ever worked for a leader that you truly admire and have wanted to emulate? Very few people say yes. Very few people. So we're already at a negative, in my view. I think all you got to do is look in the world and look at our politicians. Not that I want this conversation to become political, but how many great leaders do you really know? And so we need to give them examples of what we believe great leadership looks like. And then at some level, they've got to have the education to understand. Maybe it's a coursework, but it's also, I'm going to speak for the profession I'm in, it's some coaching.
I think you're right. Maybe start coaching at a younger age.
Well,
how to coach them on empathy and
how to coach them on everything. The classic thing that happens is today is Johnny or Mary, they're doing, great in their role let's promote them. And they throw them into a director or a VP slot and say, go sick 'em tiger. And it's like,
all the time.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what to do. Right. And so if you believe what I said a minute ago, that very few of us have actually worked for people that we admire and want to emulate, where have they learned leadership skills from? Home. What does that look like? And so when you see people, I early on, I've been doing executive coaching now since 2009. Early on in my executive coaching work, it was funny because I set out, I want to coach high potentials and executives and help them be, more effective. A bunch of broken executives showed up. I coached a number of remedial folks that were literally told, shape up or you're fired. And so it's recognizing that, going back to what I said quite a while ago, who you are is how you lead, and who you are is the sum total of everything that you've experienced in your life, maybe even before. So whether you're 18 or 21 or 41 or 61, you're bringing your whole self into that role. And if you and this goes back to maybe something else we've talked about, is how do you really understand how everything that you brought with you is affecting how you show up and how you lead other people.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. I will say I've been on this personal journey lately, of dealing with some issues from my childhood. I think a lot of people not a lot. Yeah, I don't know how many. I'm sure statistically, quite a lot of people have had difficult childhoods.
Just about everybody I've ever coached has.
Right?
I don't know too many people that have had perfect childhoods.
Yeah, right? Like, it's a rare thing. There's and so with that, a lot of us are, we have these neural networks that are just programmed to keep us going in this way to survive, because that's what we had to do when we were young. It's how we were in survival mode, and they're not healthy, right? Like, and you have to untether some of those, negative self-beliefs, and that takes a lot of work.
Yes, it does.
To your point earlier, like, if you grow up in this kind of environment, like, how can these children get the coaching that they need if they're not getting it in the home? Or, like, how did you find your way that way? What I mean?
Two questions there. One is companies have got to start investing in people sooner. It's that simple. They got to stop paying lip service to our most important asset is our people, and then they don't invest in them, right? So companies have got to recognize they have to invest in people as soon as they get into a role. I won't name the company, but my daughter works for a company here in the Indianapolis area. And as soon as they get into a new role, they're already talking about the next role. They're already talking about what they need to do to level up and to grow into that proverbial next role. Every company needs to be run that way. And then the second part of your question, I'll answer it this way. I mentioned I've done a lot of remedial assignments, which a lot of executive coaches don't like to do, and I don't blame them. They're not fun sometimes. Of the people that survived and actually figured it out, that saved their jobs, every one of them got into counseling as well.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I think it just goes to show, like, to your point earlier, you take your whole self to work, everything from your home, from your past. And I think for leaders to have that self-awareness and to really understand all of those belief systems. You talk in your book about belief systems and our subconscious and our unconscious thoughts that were kind of like made up of those two things. I'd love to tell us a little bit more about what is the difference between your subconscious and your unconscious thoughts, and how can we kind of understand more about that and how it serves us.
Well, I'm not Carl Jung, but I'm thinking of a quote of one of my friends right now, Terry Small, who calls himself the brain guy, goes around the world teaching people about the brain. You have to become aware of your awareness. And so if we think about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, the conscious mind is, the prefrontal cortex and how we activate our executive functions and whatnot. But there's so many things that have happened, to the point you used the term neural pathways, neural highways. We have programmed our brain. Our brain has to do that, by the way. If we had to think about every decision we made, our brain couldn't survive. So we build up, something happens, our brain reacts a certain way. And so we have to become aware of our awareness to figure out, well, when I am triggered, is my reaction a healthy reaction or not? What's the emotions attached to that? to that reaction, and then figuring out the strategies. And sometimes just being able to name the emotions that go with a triggered event will set people free. And I've done this in workshops where we'll actually, I worked with an organization a few years ago that was in massive stress mode. It was 7 men. They were way behind on opening the facilities they were attempting to open, and losing $1 million a month, massive stress, and just being able to identify the triggers on a daily basis, putting words to those emotions, and then reframing those words. It was life-changing for him. One of the guys in the workshop, it was a 1-day workshop, made the comment, I've been an executive for 42 years. That was the single best exercise I've ever done in any kind of workshop, and helping them understand what's going on. So
I think that's such a powerful tool, because I think so often we're taught that it's not okay for us to feel, or we don't know how to feel what we're feeling. And I've experienced the same thing where, like, I'll practice mindfulness and I'll just sit outside and try to pay attention to what is it that I'm actually feeling right now, and give that space. I'm feeling angry. Okay, let's just sit in that for a minute, and let's just let anger have its space. What is anger trying to tell me?
Right,
What are you
right.
trying to teach me? And then I think once you feel it, for me, I've noticed it's easier for it to just let it go, because I've given it kind of the space.
Exactly.
To breathe.
Yeah, and that's one of the differences between therapy and coaching. Therapy is looking at the past and trying to figure out. And again, I mentioned that some of the remedial assignments, the people that were successful did some of that work too. But in coaching, there's a very fine line that we, as ICF, International Coach Federation certified coaches, we can't cross unless I'm certified also as a psychologist or a social worker or whatever it may be. But again, just being able to understand source. Quick story. I was coaching a gentleman in Switzerland a few years back, really struggled with conflict. And so as we were going through some of our coaching sessions, I kept probing, kept asking questions. And finally, all of a sudden, the light bulb went on. He goes, Ed, I figured it out. I said, figured what out? He said, why I'm so conflict averse. He said, in language school, I was the worst kid in the class, and I was constantly ridiculed and made fun of. And so once he was aware of that, I said, so Sven, what would you like to do with that today? That happened a long time ago. You're now an executive in a firm. You have to manage conflict. You've got to grow in that area, be able to embrace it. And he thought for a moment. He says, I think I can just let go of it now, can I? I said, it's your choice. And he goes, yeah, I think I can. But it was understanding that source for him without, again, I was not playing therapist. I was simply just asking him good coaching questions to say, when this happens, what's going on inside of you? When this happens, just asking good coaching questions where the light bulb went on for him one day.
Yeah, I think that's such a great example of just validating the experience and being aware of your awareness and aware of what happened. It's a perfect example. And then how he was able to reframe it and move forward from that.
Exactly. Yeah, he didn't need to go through, years of therapy to unravel all the ridicule that he had as a young man growing up in Switzerland and not being able to, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's 4 major languages spoken in Switzerland, right? So I can't imagine that.
Yeah, immediately this quote comes to my mind. You probably heard before: "What we resist persists."
Yes.
Like if we just let go of that resistance and just kind of give it space.
Right.
That's fascinating. Oh,
right. Yeah.
Man, this is such a fantastic conversation. I feel like we could talk all day long.
Oh yeah, I think.
Oh my God.
Well, as you can tell, it's my passion, and I feel very blessed. In my book, I do outline the journey for me, and to the point that we talked about just a few minutes ago. I've done a lot of work to unravel a pretty difficult childhood of my own, and was that fun work? Was it work that I wanted to do? No, it was work I had to do because some things kept happening in my life that weren't productive. And so once we began to figure some of that out and begin that journey of healing and discovery, then it's amazing what showed up after that. But
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned earlier is such an important point, is you mentioned that the brain has these neural pathways and it
Mhm.
doesn't want to think that's how it works, like it's supposed to work that way. And I think that can be very what's the word I want? It takes the pressure off, right? And it also makes the healing process you give yourself a little bit more grace with it to say like this is going to be work.
yeah,
It's not going to be an easy process because this is just how the brain works. But give yourself the patience to say if I keep on doing
yep,
this, keep on learning this and consistently put in the work,
yep,
I can change it because
yep.
the brain is that plastic.
Well,
So I
you've got
think
to,
I love that. It's just like giving yourself some grace through all of that. Like it's not going to change right away and that's
right.
okay.
Well,
You
you
know?
have to rewire the neural circuitry in your brain. And that rewiring, one of the myths that I write about in my book is the 21 days to change a habit. It's a myth. If you go do the research on Wikipedia on it, it was a plastic surgeon or something like that came up with that idea. The example that I use, in fact, right now, as I'm sitting at my desk in my home office, the trash can is just to my left. If I were to move the trash can over to the right, about 21 attempts from now, I would not automatically want to go over here. I could, but if I've got a major neural pathway I'm trying to rewire, it may take months or years. Because what the brain likes the path of least resistance. And so you've got to basically, like the old vinyl records, you've got to scratch that old highway and rebuild a new highway. And that can take a day or a month or a year. So that if anybody still is operating on that philosophy that, 21 attempts or 21 days and I can change any habit, no, maybe.
Yeah, it reminds me of your friend Maddie you talked about at the
Mm,
beginning, who had lost 150 pounds. And she even mentioned herself that she had fallen off the bandwagon,
yeah,
but she
exactly.
still lost 150 pounds. So it's
Yeah.
like, it's just when you fall down, just getting back up and moving forward and trying again,
Yeah.
and just being committed that way.
Well,
So
you and I talked briefly right before we got on the call, and something bubbles up right now is that concept of the growth mindset
yes.
and getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Because when we are trying to rebuild new habits and new thinking and new ways of doing things and new ways of showing up, again, the path of least resistance, the default wants to override the neural highway. We have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And knowing that there's that period of time where I go from, well, I used to be an expert and now I'm a flat beginner. And over time, I can move from beginner to novice to maybe eventually expert. But you have to be willing to go through that pain of the learning curve.
I
So,
love that. I love that quote in your book. We must become comfortable being uncomfortable in order to move beyond our current beliefs and achieve the goals we want to achieve.
yep.
So I've been thinking a lot about this quote and what does that feel like, the living in discomfort, right? Like we all want to be happy. We talk
Oh,
about being happy and
it's
everybody's
horrible
in pursuit of
sometimes.
happiness, right? Like, but if we're constantly wanting to go into this place where we are living in this discomfort, how do you find peace in that? If
Ooh.
you're someone that really wants to grow and challenge yourself, but know that you're going to be in the red zone and it's going to be hard.
Are you
What
sure you're not a philosopher? You ask very deep questions.
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe so. I just think about these things because, we want life to not always be painful, but if we want to grow, it's going to be painful. So how do we reconcile that? I don't know. If you don't have the answer, I don't
Well,
either.
I think there's a starting point for the answer. I don't know if it's the answer, but the starting point is, what's your motivation?
Yeah.
What is it that you're trying to accomplish, and is it worth going through the pain? So if the
Ooh,
why is big enough,
yes.
if the
The
why
why
is big
gotta be
enough,
big enough to
right,
hold you.
to
To
hold like
yes.
in the example of Maddie, apparently, and in fact, I'm headed back to Fort Myers tonight. I'll be getting my hair cut next week. I'm going to ask her what her why was, because I didn't ask her that the last time she cut my hair, but I want to know that now. What was the actual trigger event that caused you to get in motion? So I think that, yeah, if we know, well, let me think about this. We as humans make decisions normally based on two motivations: moving toward pleasure, moving away from pain. Hopefully, we can add a third element, which is moving toward wisdom. So
I
we
love that.
learn from our experiences that worked and didn't work. We learn from others that have gone before us. We learn, but unfortunately, a lot of what we do is moving away from pain and moving toward pleasure.
It's like we're looking for this homeostasis, right? The body wants to stay where it's safe. It doesn't,
Exactly.
and we're constantly having to fight against that.
Well, then you just triggered the other thing about the basics of the brain. What's the number one job of the brain?
Stay safe.
Exactly. Keep you alive, right?
Yes, don't die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a natural negative bias to the brain that we have to overcome. And if
Mm.
you look at whatever you believe about, how long we've been on the earth and all that, we've overcome that or we wouldn't be here.
Yes, it's so true. It makes me think about stress too. Like a lot of times people
Mm,
think stress is this big negative thing, but stress is a motive. Stress is a healthy thing in appropriate doses. The way we look at it and the way that we see it, I think, makes a big difference. We need stress in our lives.
well, Kelly McGonigal, are you familiar with her?
No. Uh-uh.
Yeah, I would look up on YouTube her video on stress. She started off researching stress with the same belief that most of us have, which is stress kills, right? Stress is bad for you. What she now teaches is that it's not stress that is bad or that kills, it's what you think about stress.
It's like being aware of the awareness, right? Like it
Right.
goes back to that whole.
Yeah. Because actually, the stress response from a chemical standpoint is a very positive experience. And if we can
Mm.
channel that and recognize and again, that's what I did with that organization, those 7 gentlemen that they were 18 months behind schedule and losing $1 million a month was by reframing the negative words they were using into productive, positive words. And I know some people, oh, that's just Pollyannish. They're just ignoring. No, they were reframing how they were thinking about what they were experiencing every day. And that's
Mhm.
not being Pollyannish. That's owning your mindset
Yeah, it's
and
acknowledging. You're
acknowledging and
acknowledging the reality and saying, "I'm gonna
choosing how
do it."
I'm going to react to this versus the, oh, woe is me. We're in deep, you know what?
So good. That can be applied in so many ways. That's such wisdom.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, I wanna talk a little bit about you founded the Uncommon Leadership
Yep.
Institute, and I as I was looking, I love your book, it's
Thank
fantastic,
you.
and I
Thank you.
see that you've really lived this life of service. I think it's just really incredible. And so my question is like, what is your why? What do you want your legacy to be? Like when you think about what you want to be known for and what is it that really has motivated you to kind of pursue this path
Yeah.
of significance?
Yeah. Well, I and my family were going through a process of rebuilding after a major life event for me, early 90s. We did a mission, vision, values work. And
Mm,
in Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective
mhm,
People, there's one of the habits is begin with the end in mind. And Covey has the exercise in there of imagining your funeral. And that 4 people will come up and speak about your life, but you're sitting on the front row. You got a front row seat to your funeral, right? And I did that exercise numerous times over about an 18-month period, 1992, 1990, 91, 92, actually. And from that came the mission to change the world one life at a time.
that's
And that North Star, that is what then, yeah, I don't want to get down too much of a rabbit hole, but after that, as I was moving forward in my life and career, I was able to know, was I on track or not? And I wanted it to happen a lot quicker than it actually happened.
mm,
But eventually, God gave me the platform to make the difference. So that's and that's why at my advanced age, I still work. I don't believe in retirement. As I say, as long as my brain is working, my body's working, and I can make a difference in the lives of other people, I plan to continue to do it. Now, I don't do it. I don't work 40 hours or 60 hours or 80 hours a week anymore. I'm very selective in the clients that I take on, but it just fills me up to be able to come alongside people and help them figure out their why sometimes, and also figure out what it means to be the kind of leader they really want to be. So,
That's such a beautiful mission. You want to change the world one life at a time.
yeah,
And I love how you shared that you wanted to get there faster than you did, but God eventually took you where you needed to go.
exactly.
There's such wisdom in that I think, and humility and grace, and a lesson in just for us all to just learn and be comfortable and just be patient to
But it
know
took a failure to get that.
it even
Yeah, it's like, let me go jump off the deep end and start my own company. And I tried to do that in 1993 and failed miserably. So,
man, what a great lesson though. I mean, looking back on it, I'm
oh
sure it was
yeah,
incredibly painful at the time. Talk
it
about
was.
living discomfort, right?
It
Living
was.
comfortable with
It was very
discomfort.
It was very painful.
But you rose like a phoenix. I
Yeah,
mean, to be able to lead a team of 1,200 people, and I think what, like 150 million in revenue, that the
right,
company that you were
right.
leading, that is a
Yeah.
remarkable, that is a remark. It's incredible what
Thank you.
your career has been. And
Yeah.
man, I think you're just young. You're just a young chicken, Ed.
Absolutely. Still got a long way to go. Well, I mentioned the Berkman Method Assessment. It's been my tool of choice for 25 years. Dr. Berkman was a mentor to me for a while. Came to the office every day till he was 93 and a half.
Wow,
And his attitude was, Ed, when you love what you do, it's not work. So,
so true.
when I'm coaching a person, it's not work. I feel blessed that God would put me in that position to be able to ask the right questions and hold up the right mirrors at the right time for people to be able to achieve what they're trying to achieve.
I love that, and I can tell just this our conversation that we've had has been transformative for me. I've gained so much wisdom from you. I think our audience as well, hopefully, is walking away with just a ton of insight.
Hopefully.
Um, Ed, where can people reach you if they want to get a hold of you? I know you mentioned your email. Can you share again what the best
Yep.
way to contact you is?
Yeah. Ed at edchafin.com.
Excellent.
And
Yeah.
edchafin.com is the website as well. It's not the Uncommon Leadership Institute, but that'll take you to that. And by the way, let me just give you a quick uncommon leadership. Where did that come from? I was inspired by George Washington Carver. His quote was, if you do the common things in life in an uncommon manner, you can change the world. And
Ooh.
if you've never, a lot of people know who George Washington Carver is. He's the guy that figured out how to do 150 things with a peanut or whatever, and led Tuskegee Institute and whatnot. But he's got an amazing story, life story. But that inspiration of, because I go back, we need uncommon leaders. We need people that recognize it's not about them. It's about the people they're blessed to serve. And it's about people that want to make the world a better place than they found it. And so that was the inspiration for Uncommon Leadership, which is my brand. Yeah. So just to throw that in, but so they can find me there. And again, if anybody wants to email me, I'd be happy to send that HBR article, Leadership That Gets Results. It is, I'd probably say I use that 75 or 80% of my coaching with executives, just because it helps illuminate one of the growth paths that most often shows up.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. And I love your book. So if you get a chance to read it out there, Uncommon Leadership, it's fantastic. And Ed, you're just such a joy. You are such a light. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
being you. I'm so glad I got to sit next to you last month.
I know, it was serendipity, wasn't it? Yeah.
I know. I hope we can stay friends for a long time after this. This is fantastic.
I'm sure we can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, stay on afterwards. And thank you everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you next week. Next week, we're going to have Kuba Zolinsky, who is the founder of Snowdog, an e-commerce agency in Poland.
Oh, wow.
And he's going to be talking to us all about how to improve the customer journey in e-commerce. So that'll be fun. So thanks so much. And we will talk to you later. All right. Stick around, Ed.